In theory, this is the image not far round the corner. The two main party leaders shake on a Brexit deal and lead their MPs to back it. But both know their positions are at stake here. Their leaderships could be destroyed if they're thought to have sold out. The Prime Minister's under vitriolic attack from many Tory MPs for allowing Jeremy Corbyn to get his hands anywhere near the levers of power on Brexit. And her position is so precarious that she can barely articulate her current policy. Because what she needs to do next week at the European Council summit in Brussels is ask for a long extension, a further delay to Brexit, albeit with the possibility of an early opt-out if her deal gets through Parliament in the next few weeks. And neither she nor many of her ministers feel able to actually say that in public.
Good morning, Dr. Fox. Are we looking at a long extension to Article 50? Dr. Fox, are we looking at a long extension to Article 50?
Shadow ministers spent a chunk of the afternoon in talks with the Deputy Prime Minister.
Discussing Labour's alternative plan.
Jeremy Corbyn's chief aide, Seamus Milne, attended too. Some of Mr Corbyn's most passionate supporters are amongst those warning that these talks are a trap and that agreeing to any deal would be a betrayal.
Any Brexit is really a Tory Brexit, and especially one which you are co-signing with a Tory Prime Minister. I mean, no one is going to buy this. We're in Ramsay MacDonald territory. You know, we really are. You cannot walk away from those negotiations with anything less than a confirmatory public vote on whatever comes out of them.
No, with great respect, sit down. No, I won't at the moment. I will in a minute.
Tempers were strained by Brexit in the House of Lords this afternoon. This language, the Lords' equivalent of, do you want to step outside?
Some people think, says, what did the noble Lord say? Would the noble Lord like to stand up and repeat what he said?
Go on.
Some MPs were watching the progress of the bill the Commons passed by one vote last night, compelling the government to ask the EU for a long delay to Brexit. Pro-Brexit peers filibustered 13 votes so far to try to frustrate that. One veteran diplomat thinks it's not a done deal that the EU will offer a long extension at all.
I think, again, the British political elite is persuading itself that it's a foregone conclusion that they'll get a lengthy extension if they demand it. That's not the picture as I see it. I think there are real qualms about a lengthy extension in the absence of real clarity from the British political elite as to where this could now go.
Bizarrely, one anti-Brexit Labour backbencher got 30 minutes of the Prime Minister's time this afternoon, having asked for it at question time.
So there was a Dear Colleague letter, and I quoted in the chamber to her, holding it up. It says here, you'll meet anyone. When's my turn? And that was today. So, I mean, I was trying to ask which red lines now have shifted, and would she be prepared to budge on a customs union? Both of those two, I feel I'm somewhat none the wiser on.
I think there's probably some kind of symbol about how many people view how broken Parliament is going on there. But
the Commons had to suspend its sitting this afternoon when a leaking pipe in the roof gushed water into the press gallery.
So the sitting is now suspended and no photographs, please.
But rules seem to count for less round here right now. There were photos as plumbing, like everything else, falls apart.
Angela Merkel has promised to stand with Ireland every step of the way, vowing to do everything she can to prevent a no-deal Brexit. Speaking after a meeting in Dublin with the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, she said she still hoped for an orderly Brexit. Our business editor Siobhan Kennedy has spent the day talking to companies in Ireland, the EU nation which would be hardest hit if the UK fails to reach agreement with Brussels.
The German Chancellor rolling through the green of Dublin on her first official visit since the Brexit saga began. But she hasn't come for tea. These are crisis talks as no deal, delays and mounting desperation fills the Irish air.
First, Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday, and today the German Chancellor Angela Merkel arriving here behind me. These the two key EU heads of state that Leo Varadkar is relying upon to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ireland.
That's what he wants, but Mrs Merkel has also come here to hear how the Taoiseach will handle a potentially chaotic no deal along the Irish border.
I wanted to demonstrate with my visit that even if we now head into a crucial phase when Britain is leaving the European Union, we want to continue to stand together as 27. Next Wednesday we shall have our European Council meeting and we will see by then what the British Prime Minister will tell us. I can only say that, as I said, we're following this with great interest and we hope that this will open up new possibilities of an orderly Brexit, of an orderly exit of Britain.
A few miles from that border, at this whisky distiller, there's something in the air. The prospect of a no deal has been brewing for months, despite endless talks and yet another vote for a delay in Westminster last night. The pressure is rising. They brew 10 million litres of the hard stuff every year, just under half of it exported, most to America. But unlike whisky, Brexit hasn't improved with age.
I think I could be going for 20 years. God help us.
Alan Martin is the manager at this old Guinness site, which now makes over 80 different brands of whisky.
Can I try a bit?
Well, that's 68%.
He welcomes Angela Merkel's visit today, but those Irish eyes aren't 100% convinced.
Are you worried if they can't reach a deal that Ireland will be hung out to dry?
Well, it's a distinct possibility, I suppose. If a no deal happens, well, there's going to have to be a border, which would be disaster, really, in terms of everything. Like, nobody wants to see a border in Ireland ever again.
That's what Mrs. Merkel believes too, that maintaining peace is paramount. Mr. Martin says the consequences of not doing so are unthinkable.
If they start talking about border lines and things like that, that is a very dangerous ticking time bomb. If you have a customs man standing on the border, you have to have somebody to protect the customs man. These things don't take long to escalate, you know, and nobody in the right mind would want to go near that again. But it could happen.
Along the border, remnants of checkpoints still stand, a stark reminder of the way life used to be. The Irish Prime Minister is determined he won't go back there, but has so far failed to reassure Europe of his plans if there's a no deal. Near Dundalk on the border in the south, where once there was farmland, now freight is the big business. Nearly half these trucks constantly crisscross the border between Ireland and the north, and they're worried about the lack of planning for no deal.
And we have customers who are originally manufacturing in Northern Ireland, and they've set up manufacturing facilities in the south, and it's to be Brexit ready.
Seamus McGinnity says without a border plan, his trucks could come to a standstill.
You know, there are going to be delays, there's going to be customs checks, there's going to be, there's going to be costs that we have to factor in. Who's going to take those costs? Ultimately, it's going to be the consumer. Are we ready for it? Have we all the infrastructure in place? Have we our customs posts in order? No, we don't. Because even when we looked at our own government, there's a lack of clarity of what needs to be done.
Well, Mr. Varadkar was asked just now at a press conference exactly what his plan for a no deal was. I have to say there was very little detail really around this crucial issue of the Irish border you heard about there in my package from that businessman. Mr. Varadkar simply said it's not possible, quite frankly, to have a clear plan. Let's hear from him now.
The unlikely event that we end up in a no-deal scenario, whatever challenges we face, whether it's protecting the Good Friday Agreement or maintaining the integrity of the common market, we'll approach those as shared challenges. It won't be anyone trying to enforce anything on anyone else. It's going to be very much a shared challenge and a European challenge, and one that we're up to.
Well, he called today for the EU leaders to have patience. That's what he called for. Let's be patient. You get the sense that Mr. Varadkar wants to give the UK an extension. Certainly Angela Merkel also said in the press conference there, where there's a will, there's a way. But she would not be drawn on whether or not the EU would grant the UK another delay. She simply said, I can't answer speculative questions. But there was very much, in general, a collaborative tone from these two EU leaders today. They clearly do not want a hard deal, a no deal, a hard Brexit. They want to give the UK enough time to come up with an agreement by this crucial council meeting next week. But they did both reiterate that if there was no deal, if there was a hard Brexit, then that would be a challenge. But they said it was a challenge that they were up to.
That's Siobhan Kennedy there in Dublin.
Now, joining us from that city is the Irish Senator Neil Richmond from the governing Fine Gael party. Senator Richmond, you probably heard Sir Ivan Rogers tell us a little earlier that the likelihood of a long extension is actually very far from a given.
Well, absolutely. What we expect on Wednesday is the Prime Minister to come to Brussels with a coherent plan, a coherent request for an extension, but for good reason. We saw on Tuesday when President Macron met the Taoiseach in Paris, he said we can consider a long extension, but it would require, of course, the UK to participate in the European elections on May 22nd to 25th, but it also requires something meaningful. Is there a real plan to negotiate a full customs union? Is there a plan for a British general election? Is there a plan for another referendum? Nothing can be taken for a given. Of all 27, Ireland is the most favourable towards an extension, short or long, but we have to convince our 26 other EU colleagues, and they have to be convinced by the Prime Minister, and that's why we want to give the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition as much time and as much space to present something that Westminster can back. We know what Westminster don't want. We now need to know what Westminster do want, cognizant of what we in the EU side can accept and cognizant of their responsibility to the rights of the British and Irish citizens in Northern Ireland.
You mentioned your fellow 26 nations. Who might conceivably refuse anyway?
Well, absolutely. The rule is that if the UK requests a further extension, it has to be a unanimous decision of all EU 27 member states. Therefore, it's not a given. However, we in Ireland are very keen to see that work through, and we will continue to be the UK's best friend within the EU to try and deliver that. But I can't stress, we really need to see from Westminster and from the British government a coherent plan emerge over the weekend and into that vital European Council meeting on Wednesday.
Well, now, if there is a no deal, there would have to be an Irish border, and it would fall to you to have to put it up, because all the member states are responsible for the borders on their own territory. Are you really prepared for that?
Well, of all the EU 27, when it comes to Brexit preparedness, when it comes to any form of Brexit preparedness, the Commission has ranked Ireland as the most prepared, and we put the infrastructure in for east-west customs. However, when it comes to the border, it's too simplistic to say there has to be a border, and it's too simplistic to say that it falls to the Irish government. The Irish government has responsibilities, both to the single market and indeed to the Good Friday Agreement, but equally, the British government, as a co-guarantor of that Good Friday Agreement, and potentially a nation in the world trading under simple WTO terms, also has a responsibility. And we saw in the political declaration in December 17 the decision by the EU and the UK to maintain that open border.
Right.
We've come up with a formula to do that through the withdrawal agreement, through the backstop. No member state has ever left the EU before, and certainly not a member state whose sole land frontier with the EU post departure is one governed by an international peace treaty lodged with the United Nations.
Well, of course, the British are also, it is said, thinking about pushing it into the Irish Sea, the border.
Well, what we've always said is we want to make sure that there's no border on the island of Ireland, no hardening of the border, but we don't want to see a hardening of the border down the Irish Sea. There's already changes and divestments between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, but we don't want to see them strengthened any much way in any other further deal. However, within the backstop, within the withdrawal agreement, we can see that the hard physical checks will largely be removed through a customs, trade and regulatory alignment that the EU and the UK are desperate to achieve, but that can only be achieved in a future political forum post the withdrawal agreement. In a no-deal scenario, it's a little bit risky to start talking about hypotheticals and undermining the ratification processes at hand, but we are very keen to make sure that there's no hardening of the border. But if the UK choose to crash out of the EU, both the Irish and British governments start to lose control of the maintenance of that seamless border. We can't allow that to happen. Right. I'm happy to see Westminster voting against a no-deal scenario, but simply voting for something isn't good enough. We need to see that coherent plan come to the Council on Wednesday.
Very briefly, this is why I'm really concerned. We watch it as acutely as you do. And I'm wondering, do you see any grounds for compromise? Do you see any sign of it?
We've had over over 2.5 years of constant compromise that produced the withdrawal agreement and the backstop. If you look at the indicative votes that have gone through Westminster, they all relate to the future political framework. We in the European side said there's lots of room there for further discussion, for further negotiation. That document only stands at 29 pages plus 6 of appendices, but in order to get to that place, we need to see the withdrawal agreement and the backstop passed by Westminster as soon as possible.
Senator, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Senator, thank you.